I'm here today with Asha, who is the CEO of Giving Tuesday Global, Amit, who is the MD of Bain Capital Mumbai, and Archana, who is the CEO of Jai Vakil Foundation. Amit and Archana have also set up A.T. Chandra Foundation. And we're here to talk about giving in India today, in the rise of individual giving specifically. So to start with, Giving Tuesday, as we know, is building a generosity movement that is making giving an everyday part of our lives. So if you could tell us a little bit about what this means to you, why you think it's important, what role can it play for people?
Sure. Well, it's really nice to be here. So I've worked on Giving Tuesday since it was first created, which is 8 years ago. So I've seen it grow from a relatively simple and straightforward idea of a day of giving following 2 days of consumption in the United States, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, to now what is really a global generosity movement. And what it means to me, I guess, is it has helped me reframe my own definition of the word generosity, which I define as a sort of deeply held universal value, which has many different expressions. And certainly donating to civil society organizations is one of them. There are also many other expressions other than monetary ones. NGOs tend to get very worried when I say that. But actually, if you appeal to people's deeper sense of generosity, you do end up making more money as well. So it's actually a very savvy fundraising move to really make people feel that they have the capacity to make an impact, no matter how much or how little money they happen to have. We all have something that we can give generously to make the lives of others better. We have the capacity to do that every day. There's literally no one in the world who doesn't have the ability to do that. So I think what Giving Tuesday means to me is the opportunity to spread generosity globally, to look at the really interesting systems changes that might affect. Um, in the meantime, the more immediate capacity for civil society to do what is really an urgent job at a time of crisis, and also to erase the divisions between those who have and those who need.
That's really good. I want to touch upon something you said, but before that, if you if you want to talk about what this means to you, this movement.
Yeah, I think Asha set this conversation up really well. I don't think I would be where I am if it wasn't for the extra ordinary generosity of many people in the early years of my life. I've studied on scholarships all my higher education, and that hasn't escaped me. And so my wife and I have been givers right from the day we got married, and we have tried to increase our giving, in a steady manner ever since. And I think both of us believe that what most people lack, and I think Asha again used the word opportunity a lot. What most people really lack is fundamentally opportunity, and I think what what really we could do is if we could use some of what we are blessed with to provide people opportunity, whether that is money or our time. I think then the world could be really a very different place. And this is not just about changing the lives of others. It's also about changing our own lives. It's about discovering happiness for ourselves. So I think movements like Giving Tuesday are actually very important. They're deeply symbolic movements because you start with doing it on a particular day, but then it gets you actually on a journey. And I think often every journey begins with some very specific steps. So I think it's about beginning that journey.
Yeah, so I can add to what Amit just said. I think a lot of times on platforms like these, we talk about the joy of giving, and between the person who needs it and the person who's helping with the need. But I think what we need to talk about a little bit more and understand is really what it does for ourselves, right? And if I were to step back and see, I would break platforms like this or opportunities like this into two aspects, right? One is just the loving kindness that one builds by actually showing others, you build in yourself. And over time, it is not only about the positive thing or the visible aspect of it. There is also, when you're doing loving kindness actively, there's also a side of you which is thinking about how not to be unkind, right? Let me not cheat this person because I'm wired to actually be kind. So I think there is a yin and a yang aspect to this opportunity to be kind, which over time actually transforms you internally and just makes you a much better human being. So similarly, there is to generosity, right? Generosity would be non-stealing. So let me not take what is not mine, whether it is in a hotel or at any platform. So I think the flip of the positive aspect is something that really helps build inner transformation, if I may add.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what something each of you said in a different way is that touches upon what was going to be my next question. When we talk about giving in India, a lot of the times the conversation is centered around high net worth individuals. It's centered around foundations. It is centered now around CSR and what companies can do. But a movement, a platform like Giving Tuesday, what it has managed to do is make the act of giving more democratic. Anybody can be a giver, especially now, like Asha said, it's beyond just monetary. So on one hand, it's beyond like a certain sum of monetary. It can be any amount that you can give, but also it can be time, it can be resources. Like you said, it can be platforms, it can be access. What do you think that is doing to this conversation around giving or the idea of giving generally within the country today? And anybody?
I'd like to share a conversation that happened with me literally yesterday. So I spend a lot of my time at an institute called the Jai Vakil Foundation, which is an institute for the mentally challenged. And we have a parent here whose child came to us when he was 3, and he was with us until the age of 18. And he passed away a couple of months ago. And a month ago, I met the mom again. She'd come to the campus, and she was telling me that I would like to volunteer at Jai Vakil. And in my head, I'm thinking, you have just lost a child who used to come here, and you've brought him physically for 15 years. Is this really some place that you want to come back in? And she saw my face, and without me asking the question, she actually said to me, she said, Archana, when I come here, I don't miss my son because I am finding myself being able to help and relate to so many other, her son's name is Man, whom I have lost. So this was her way of actually giving back. And it had nothing to do with money or anything. And I told her, I said, what would you like to do? And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, whatever it is that you guys need here. Right? And for me, that was so powerful just in terms of intent as well as ability, right? To be able to do this with your time now, I thought was just so powerful that we're actually sharing the story internally, because I've also realized that it is with the power of sharing examples and stories like this that you're able to motivate and inspire others to give back or to do things that sometimes in their own head, they're unable to figure out the how to do.
I mean, it's hard for me to speak to that question from an Indian perspective. But in the United States, certainly that the question, the conversation about philanthropy from the perspective of high net worth individuals or big foundations, big dollar giving, does sort of co-opt a lot of that conversation. And it's a needed conversation. I mean, that area of the world needs conversation and dialogue and scrutiny and all of that. But what gets left out of that conversation is just the generosity of normal everyday people, and they deserve that attention too. Though the people who are giving small dollar amounts or their time or their kindness or their mentorship, et cetera, are not expecting any power. They don't receive any additional power or capital as a result of doing that. But what they do get is the reward, it's been well said, of not only giving, but of giving as a collective. So that is one of the most powerful things, not just with Giving Tuesday, but with all of the movements that we see now that are really causing sort of sweeping impacts, is that the power of our collective voice is greater, I think, than anybody anticipated that it might be. So I think that's really remarkable. And then I would just add to that lovely story that I think when I think about the impact of generosity, I think about the long tail impact of it, right? So when you see acts of generosity, it changes your DNA, and you are more likely to start assimilating that behavior into your own life. Once you start assimilating that behavior into your own life, so will the people around you, because they'll be impacted by it. Right. So one thing that's happening on Giving Tuesday this year in the States is there's a town in Texas called El Paso, which had a mass shooting a couple of months ago. It's also right on the border with Mexico. And so it is the front lines of the immigration wars, which are causing a lot of crisis in the United States right now, and really sowing a lot of hatred and division and uncivil discourse. So I think about a child, right, living in El Paso, who is seeing all of that, right, all of these acts of violence and all these acts of intolerance and xenophobia. And this Giving Tuesday El Paso is doing a campaign of solidarity with the city that is right over the Mexican border, Juarez. It's not a monetary campaign. They're bringing artists together and families together and doing things like joint murals, things that will create a statement about them not being divided, but about there being humans on both sides of that border. And I think about the child who's witnessed all of this violence, seeing this statement of solidarity, and what that might how that child might grow up being differently impacted. And then think about that times a million, times 10 million, times a billion.
Yeah.
Tough to add to what both these ladies have just said. But look, I think India has had a extraordinary period of wealth creation over the last decade or so. And unfortunately, that hasn't been accompanied with a few notable exceptions like Mr. Premji, with commensurate giving amongst many of our rich. I would hope that with some lag effect we see some of that happen. But yet I was asked this question at an event I was speaking at day before, whether I feel optimistic about the future of giving and philanthropy in India, and I said I actually feel we are entering the golden age of philanthropy in India, and I'll tell you why. I think it's less to do with with the rich and the billionaires. It's more to do, in my mind, with the ordinary citizens of India, and especially the millennials. I think the millennials, as I interact with them, I when I go to college campuses, I'm involved with building a university, I see a very big shift in this generation, which is coming in relative to my generation and the generation before it. My generation and the generation before it, while we were responsible, I think, for some pretty extraordinary innovations and building businesses, I think we were deeply irresponsible with the damage that we've done to this planet. And we thought less constructively about society and issues of the sort which are linked to sustainability. Millennials, on the other hand, I think very differently, I've noticed, about these kind of issues, and are much more eager to engage with societal issues, including giving back. And the tangible ways in which I'm seeing that manifest itself is with the kind of choices they're making when they're getting out of, university and colleges. And even in top-notch universities and colleges, I'm seeing that they want to go and they want to work in some of the best fellowships in the countries: Young India Fellowship, Teach for India, Gandhi Fellowship. They want to go and even engage in some cases with, they want to work for the Prime Minister's, Rural Fellowship, or the Chief Minister's fellowships in different, states. And that's basically because they want to engage with, building the nation. In many cases, they want to take up jobs in NGOs. And I think that is what's very interesting. In some cases, we are seeing professionals who are midstream, at the peak of their careers, wanting to do things very differently and build social enterprises. You guys are great examples of that at IDR. Uh, and I think this is where India is going to change. Archana talked about Jai Vakil. What she didn't talk about is one third of our workforce are pure volunteers, people who basically give anywhere from half to full time to basically, run important positions in our organization. This is what I think the new India is going to be about. People want to engage with contributing towards society, not because they don't have a choice, but because that is their choice. And I think that will be either with their time or with their money. And I think it'll be at the peak of their years. It'll be at the, they will be doing things really from their heart and not because there will be a regulation which will force them to.
So just off the bat, thank you for saying that millennials get a really bad rap, and it was really nice to hear something positive. Almost as a follow-up to that, I wanted to ask, what do you think are some of the gaps that individual giving could fill that currently philanthropy or CSR would not be able to? And a really good example is this giving of time, and as more people come into the space, being able to choose different ways of giving. But are there other more like systemic gaps that you think this could play a role in?
There's a lot of answers to that question. From a purely financial perspective, if $400 million is donated on Giving Tuesday, which more than just online last year, you can look at that as $400 million of unrestricted giving, right? So unlike a lot of philanthropy, whether it comes from individuals or from foundations or institutions, that money is very arduous to get, to procure, right? It takes a lot of staff hours and labor and so forth, and it comes with plenty of strings attached, and it's often directed towards very specific projects. So that amount of money being shifted to civil society organizations for them to do with as they like is crucial, right? Because organizations know what to do, right? They know what works. They need to just get on with it. And so I think that part is really important. And those individuals, that the average gift size of that $400 million was $100. Those individuals deserve a lot of credit for that. But the other answer, I think, is activism, right? So that money going to civil society organizations is wonderful because those organizations are tackling poverty and hunger and climate change, et cetera, et cetera. But the other side of that equation is, why do those things exist, right? They exist because of fundamentally flawed and broken systems that have to change. So I believe that those things can happen at the same time. The organizations need to do the work because people are suffering, and we need to change a system in which people can suffer at that level or any level.
Absolutely. And if you want to add something?
Yeah. I think, again, Asha made some great points. You see, when a person gives, they also land up feeling vested in the transaction. And that's why often when, big foundations give, philanthropists give, they impose all these arduous conditions on the recipients. And I think therein, in some ways, lies the opportunity to, really engage with the retail community. It's not just about getting small tickets, but it's about making them feel a lot more vested in causes. Just earlier today, I was having, for example, a conversation with our team at the foundation about this organization that we support that does some really good work in helping building a advocacy movement, which is trying to, do, amongst other things, frame laws relating to gender equality, the LGBTQ movement, etc. And I was asking them whether they have got any donors from the retail community. And they were telling me, no, all the donors are essentially high net worth individuals, philanthropists, foundations. So I was telling them, why would they not, for example, run a campaign amongst, women and people who care about these issues? Because even if they raise, 100 rupees each from many people who deeply care, and lots of people deeply care about these issues, they are achieving two things. right? One is they're broadening, diversifying their donor base, but there are lots of people they're generating actually, people who want to support these causes. They're actually generating a far bigger uh, base of activists who, to Asha's point, will then think about these issues and be more engaged with it because they now know they effectively like much more charged up voters for these causes. So I think in many ways, getting retail donors to back organizations and causes achieves two very important objectives. And I think Satwa did some very good work in this in when they, put forth their report on everyday giving, which was commissioned by, the Gates Foundation and Nilan Kaniz. And I think they talked exactly about this point, that it's important to get into everyday giving because of this reason. And I think we must think more deeply about this issue.
Absolutely. And I think, sorry, were you going to say
No, I
something?
was just going to add to this and say, they've covered pretty much everything. But the one thing is that, again, for every individual, there's a journey, right? And I think by forcing or pushing or sharing or providing platforms, everyone gets on to at least thinking about it, right? How is it that I can contribute? What is it that I can contribute? And I may start with small ticket sizes, but there's enough data to show that over the years, the involvement and the engagement only grows, right? So it may start with like $100, but then let me go see what it is I have achieved, because that instant gratification with that denomination is very high. And that pushes you to think about what next, what more, how more. And honestly, that's pretty much been the journey of Amit and me as well, right? At a particular point in our times, there was only that much that we could give. So while it might have been sizable from our perspective, we did realize that it wasn't moving any needle for anybody else. But because of that, there were learnings, there were conversations, there was what more, how, and we've reached this point today where we're saying, okay, what are the gaps? So one of the gaps, I think, at the NGO level and not just at the individual level, is that nobody wants to support capacity building of an NGO. Everybody wants to give to the program, right? Let me feed this child. Absolutely, yes. But how are you going to, build the capacity of the organization to do more? So I think there's a journey not just for the individual, but also for the organization. And once you get on with that journey or take your first step in the right direction, then really the sky is the
And
limit.
which is where Asha's point that actually everyday giving and things like Giving Tuesday actually is all unrestricted giving and can
Yes.
go towards capacity building is very, very critical.
And actually, coming back to something you said, it's what we're doing, what you said about people having conversations and learning through it. A lot of giving, I think, especially informal giving in India, happens silently. People don't talk about it. And a movement like Giving Tuesday is asking you to celebrate giving. It's asking you to celebrate the giver. It's asking you to really almost publicize this giving. And could you all tell me why you think this is such an important thing to do? Why we need to talk about this more?
So I'm going to share my personal struggle over here, right? Where I was actually coming from the belief that you give or you do whatever you want to do, and it's very personal to you. It's your personal choice. You're doing it in your personal space, and there is really no need to talk about it. And when Amit used to talk about what we were doing together, I would actually give him my perspective, and I wouldn't talk. Till over time, I saw the value of not necessarily flaunting what you're doing, but sharing it in a way and a style that is true to you. For the simple reason that there are so many people out there who want to do more, who want to give, but don't know how to think about it. So when you talk to them about your journey and how and why you're doing what you're doing, I believe now it motivates and inspires them to think about how is it that I can do more, right? And again, I'll draw a parallel at Jaivakil. All our students are mentally challenged. So for some of them, the primary goal could be something as simple as making them independent in their activities of daily living. So I do know that after 6 months of intense therapy and education, if a child learns how to pick up a spoon and take the food up to their mouth, we celebrate it. right? It is a celebration because of all the different stakeholders who have come together to make that something that seems so basic, so simple that it doesn't even register on most of our radars, but has changed the life of that entire family, right? And so there were little things like this that when I looked at collectively, I said, I think the point is to share, to motivate and inspire others to do more, as opposed to really, thump your chest and say, "Look how lovely I am for what we're really doing."
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that 100%. And I would just add two things. The first is that there's no more powerful influence on someone giving than being asked by someone in their network. So right there, if you care about something and you're giving to it, sharing that you gave to it is only going to drive more support toward that thing. And who wouldn't want that, right? You want your support to be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And I think the other reason that I think bringing the conversation about generosity into the public square is important is that it surfaces inequalities, right? So the more that we're talking about where generosity is needed, the more we're also talking about why generosity is needed in those places. And it's too easy for those who suffer to suffer in silence. And that's an intolerable situation. So I would say those are just two additional reasons that giving is a great topic of conversation. Also, we talk about everything else on social media. I don't see why we couldn't talk about this too.
I think, again, both Asha and Archana made some great points. It is a difficult debate, and at times, even in the past, I've been torn about it. But it's one of those things where I believe that it's significantly net positive to talk about what one does in a non-flamboyant way. And it's because if you think about it, pretty much every display of wealth is being reasonably flamboyantly talked about in our society, and then is in many cases being emulated pretty widely. And so if we really think about the alternative use of capital being greater good, I think that we should at least seek to propagate it more in a more eloquent manner. And when I've reflected upon our own journey, I've realized that some of the key inflection points have been inspiration. One of my key inspirations has been American philanthropist Chuck Feeney, based in San Francisco, and his journey. And if he wouldn't have written about his journey in a deeply understated way, he doesn't go around trying to receive awards, etc. In fact, he shuns publicity, but he talked about what inspired him and how he went about doing his philanthropy. And I think very few philanthropists have really achieved what he achieved. But it got Archana and me to decide to give away most of our income on a consistent basis. And then, I realized that, okay, at least we should try to do, things and talk about things in the same way that he, did it. So it is, I think, look, it can always be misunderstood. There is always that risk of it. So there's always some criticism. And one of the risks is that when you talk about, at least people land up doing back calculations as to how much you're giving, and then they think that that's about some sort of setting the bar. And that, so there, nothing I realize in life is a beauty contest. You'll always have some risk of being criticized for whatever you do, but you have to always look at the net positive. And if it's significantly positive, it's not even the borderline. We realize that we must at least do what we need to do.
Can I add one more thing to
Of
that
course.
as well?
Yeah, of course.
When I see people talking about their giving or acts of generosity or their relationship to generosity, I really almost never see it in a bragging or hubristic way. What I see in those conversations is ordinary citizens who are feeling tremendously powerless realizing that they have greater agency than they thought. And so they're celebrating the act of giving, but also that growing sense of agency. And citizens feeling like they have more power is also a huge net positive.
The one thing I will
Yeah.
add to that that we are very deeply sensitive about, since you use the word power, is in everything we do in our foundation and in our personal giving is ensure that at least the recipient never feels that. And so there must always be humility in our actions, and that at least with the people that we work, whether it be the NGOs or the people who land up actually receiving the money, that relationship is always one of equals.
I mean, you all raised such fantastic points for this. I think we have to wrap up, but before we do, I just wanted to ask one quick. If you had to give a message or ask the people watching this to have one key takeaway, a quick one, what would that be? Anyone?
I think for me, like I said, it's a journey, and the magic is in taking the first step. And I always urge anybody that I meet, just go visit multiple causes, go visit a school, go visit things. And in some place, you will find a cause that will make your heart sing. The minute you find that, it's a journey that will only progress much faster.
Well, I have to say that next Tuesday is Giving Tuesday India. So I would encourage everybody to think about what small act of generosity they might do on that day and every day after it, and also that I think it's wise to hold two things at the same time, which is that every small act of generosity makes an impact, and that also we can have a big vision for a better future.
So I would just add to what Asha said. I think you may give next Tuesday, but I can assure you whenever you give, you get every day. That's been my learning. I have never felt poorer in my life. After having given anything, it's always I've always got something back, and I've actually never met anyone who's given anything, whether it's their time or money, and felt poorer at the end of it. So be generous. That would be my humble submission to everybody who's watching. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. Like Asha said, next Tuesday is Giving Tuesday India. So if people are looking for ideas, I think there's a ton of them online. You should just find something. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.